When we cover these cases for you, the ones that hit the hardest are the ones where we can clearly see that there was deep-rooted, disturbing, and long-lasting injustice. Cases where those responsible for protecting us, our parents, our schools, our police, are the ones who are the perpetrators of this injustice. It makes all of our blood boil to hear of lives destroyed and families torn apart and futures snatched for trivial reasons. If you feel this way too, this case is your worst nightmare come to life. A nightmare one 14-year-old girl had to live 32 years ago. This is a case that shook India to its core. This is the story of Ruchika Girhotra. Hi everyone, welcome to Desi Crime, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryaan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that will shake your faith in humanity.
Aishwarya, with that heavy description you started off with, it just feels like, unlike many true crime cases, it starts off with something nice. It starts off with
the
a
perfect
happy,
family,
beautiful, perfect family, and then shit just went wrong. This doesn't sound like one of those stories.
And we're not beginning there at all. With this case, we're actually beginning right at the end. And by that time, everything was already destroyed. It was too late at this point because the country had already failed 14-year-old Ruchika. The media had failed her. The community she grew up in, the school she studied in, everyone had failed her. And now there was no taking it back. Nothing and nobody could fix the damage done. And it was too late to fix the damage done because 14-year-old Ruchika was no more. She was dead. From the outside, it seemed like Ruchika had taken her own life. She had committed suicide. After all, the autopsy and viscera report conducted by Dr. Subhash Sharma at the Chandigarh General Hospital on the 30th of December 1993, a day after Ruchika was found dead, revealed that a compound group of insecticide was detected in her stomach, liver, spleen, kidney, small intestine, and blood. The bottle of insecticide was found right next to her body, which lay on her bed. There was no sign of forced entry in the house, no struggle marks on her body, no fingerprints other than those of her own, no shoe prints, nothing. And Ruchika had been low, depressed, and crying all throughout her classes in school and at home for a while now. In fact, Ruchika hadn't even gone to school for months now. She had been a shell of herself for 3 years. What had changed in those 3 years, I bet you're wondering? What could make a 14-year-old girl this sad for this long, to the point where she possibly took her own life? For that, let's backtrack 3 years, back to the year 1990. Living in the bustling and beautiful city of Chandigarh, Ruchika was a grade 10 student at the Sacred Heart School for Girls. She had grown up in that school, studying there since when she was in the first grade. All her friends were at that school, including her childhood best friend, Aradhana Prakash. Ruchika had walked those corridors day in and day out, and it felt like a second home. Ruchika's family was a small one. After her mother's death just 4 years ago, when Ruchika was 10, she, her father S.C. Girhotra, and her younger brother, 10-year-old Ashu Girhotra, were the only ones in that house. But they were still each other's lifeline. The tragedy of Ruchika's mother's death had brought them all closer. They all knew they needed to be each other's rock and system of support. And the family had no shortage of support in that regard. Ruchika's best friend, Aradhana's mother, had slowly over the years taken on the role of a sort of mother figure in Ruchika's life. Despite this obviously significant death in the family, the Girhotras were trying their best to live a normal and happy life, to cope with their loss.
Aishwarya, it often happens that when in a nuclear family one of the members dies, it usually leads to disintegration of the family.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's nice to see the opposite, where I know, I mean, it does not bring them together in the sense that it's a positive
Right.
thing, but they're still able to fight through it and have a
I
normal
agree.
family.
I agree. And I think it also depends on the age groups of people. I think the more likely the children are to be in their
True, true,
teenage
true.
years, the more likely they take it like in a different way than the
Hmm.
older parents. But even though Ruchika was sort of in that age group, they all still somehow
Yeah.
managed to come back together. But also, of course, despite having taken it well, Ruchika needed an outlet. To cope with the loss of her mother's passing, Ruchika had found her outlet in tennis. And by every standard, she was an incredibly talented young woman. The sport had become her dream, and she had every hope of making it big as a sportswoman. It wasn't just Ruchika alone though. She and Aradhana had both made a name for themselves as trainees at the Haryana Lawn Tennis Association. In fact, she was so talented that on the 11th of August 1990, the head of the Haryana Lawn Tennis Association, Shambhu Pratap Singh Rathore, who was also the Director General of the Haryana Police, visited Ruchika's house to meet with her father. Perhaps he had seen her play, the family thought, and was left impressed by the girl's talent. Because when Rathore showed up at Ruchika's house that day, he couldn't stop praising her. But he wasn't there just for praise. He was there to let Ruchika's father know that he had decided to arrange for Ruchika to undergo special tennis training under him. He asked for Ruchika to meet him the very next day to discuss the details of the training and begin as soon as possible. Rathore, born in 1941, was 49 years old at the time and a 1966 batch IPS officer of the Haryana cadre. As the founding president of the Haryana Lawn Tennis Association, Rathore's office was the garage of his house at 469 Sector 6, Panchkula in Chandigarh. His house had a clay tennis court behind it, which, by the way, was built by encroaching on government land where Ruchika, Aradhana, and a group of other young girls used to play tennis in the evenings. It was at that office that Rathore had wanted to meet Ruchika. And Ruchika knew who Rathore was. In fact, Rathore's own daughter, Priyanjali, was Ruchika's classmate. So she thought she knew the man she was going to meet. She thought she was safe. The next day, on the 12th of August, Ruchika and Aradhana went to play tennis at the court right outside Rathore's house, like they did almost every day. And after that, walked to the office of DGP Rathore located inside the compounds of the Tennis Association. Rathore welcomed the two young girls into his garage-turned-office, but Rathore only asked Ruchika to sit. He asked Aradhana to go out of the office and call the tennis coach Mr. Thomas, and so Aradhana left, leaving Rathore and Ruchika all alone. Aradhana found Mr. Thomas, who said he'll be in the office shortly, and so Aradhana made her way back to the office, and as she opened the door and walked in, she couldn't believe what she was seeing in front of her. She saw Rathore grabbing both of Ruchika's hands, his body pressed against hers. Ruchika was struggling to get him off of her. This was a full-grown man, 50 years of age, using all of his strength on the just 14-year-old girl.
To think that, nothing makes this situation okay. I mean, it's depravity at its worst. But to think that this wasn't in the moment,
right?
It
It
seems
was planned.
calculated.
Yeah, so calculated.
So this was on his mind for hours. This scenario was something he was probably playing out in his brain for the last 2 days, and that's even scarier.
Yeah, no, you're right. I never thought about it like that. But yeah, it seems every move of this is so calculated. The moment Rathore saw Aradhana, he let go of Ruchika and fell into his chair. He shouted at Aradhana to leave the room and bring back Coach Thomas, but Aradhana refused. She knew she was just a kid too, but she wasn't leaving her best friend alone with this man for even a second. Rathore again shouted at Aradhana, telling her to leave the office. But this time, Ruchika ran out of the office and Aradhana followed her. They ran till they were far enough and knew for sure that Rathore wasn't following them. Ruchika used to call Aradhana Rimu out of affection. Quote, "I was so afraid and nervous that I asked Rimu what we should do now. We decided that Mr. Rathore is IG police and we were afraid of him as he may involve or harass our parents. Therefore, we decided not to inform our parents or anybody else about the incident. On August 13, we did not go to play. But on August 14th, Rimu and myself went to play tennis. We played till 6:30 p.m. But when we were leaving, ball picker Mr. Paltu said Mr. Rathore was calling me again. It was then that we decided to inform our parents. Rimu narrated the whole incident to my father. After that, I went to Rimu's house and told Rimu's father all of the details. End quote. Now, as much as I hate to say this, incidents of this kind aren't abnormal in India even today. So they certainly weren't abnormal in 1990. Well, the men, whether they be in politics or in the film industry, abused their positions of power for money and sex, and they got away with it at unprecedented rates. They still do. I am yet to meet a woman in my own life who hasn't been inappropriately touched or assaulted. So, yes, this incident was a horrible incident that I wish would have never happened. But remember how I described Ruchika at the beginning of the episode? The 3 years of crying in her classroom, the depression, and the possible suicide. When Ruchika told her father and Aradhana's mother of the incident, both the families took it upon themselves to inform the parents of all of the other young tennis players in Chandigarh whose parents left them outside of Rathor's house every day. None of these kids were safe, and who knew what he was capable of if nobody was around to stop him? Word of Ruchika's assault spread within the community like wildfire. All these agitated parents gathered to meet at Aradhana's house and decided they wouldn't sit quietly. They were going to make sure they tried their best to bring Ruchika some form of justice and make sure these kids were safe in their own community. These parents moved quickly in trying to get in touch with the then Chief Minister Hukum Singh, but they failed to get a meeting with him. They then tried to meet with the Home Minister Sampat Singh, but yet again they failed to get a meeting. But finally, just 2 days later, on August 7th, they met with Home Secretary J.K. Duggal, to whom they narrated the whole incident. Mr. Duggal took this matter seriously. He then narrated the incidents to the Home Minister and appointed a senior ranking official, DGP R.R. Singh, to investigate the matter. As DGP R.R. Singh began his investigation into the allegations against Rathor, he soon realized who he was dealing with when he found residents of a slum in Panchkula protesting outside his office. Yes, these people were protesting against the police officer who was investigating the man accused of assaulting a child. But these protesters weren't evil people. They were merely poor people who had been allegedly paid large sums of money by Rathor to stage these protests. DGP R.R. Singh brings Ruchika in to submit an affidavit and eventually by September 3rd actually finds Rathor guilty of the assault. In his report, he recommends an FIR be filed against him. The Home Secretary who had appointed R.R. Singh to this case reviews the report and recommends departmental action and a charge sheet against Rathor. All sounds good up until now, right? Good, honest civil servants doing their best to bring justice. While all of this was going on, something changed at Ruchika's school, Sacred Heart, though. Just 2 weeks after R.R. Singh's investigation was completed, Ruchika's father got a call on his phone. Quote, "We're removing Ruchika from the school for a late payment of her school fees. Don't send her to school anymore," said the school's principal at the time, Sister Sebastian, to Ruchika's father. If it actually was the case that Ruchika hadn't paid her school fees despite reminders, the removal might even be justified. But Ruchika's father came forward to say that that was far from the truth. In the aftermath of the assault, he had gone to pay his daughter's school fee, but the school had simply refused to accept the money. Also, there was no notice given to the Girhotra family reminding them to pay the fee, as is normal when a student fails to deposit the money on time. In fact, even the school's brochure of procedure and bylaws mention how the non-payment of fees can only lead to the school barring a student from sitting for their exams, and it absolutely is not sufficient grounds for expulsion. But Ruchika was kicked out. Many years later, in 2009, an inquiry into the expulsion by the school revealed that at the time when Ruchika was expelled, the school had 135 cases similar to those of Ruchika where the school claimed the fee hadn't been paid. But Ruchika was the only student out of those 135 to ever be expelled on these grounds. And Aryaan, you want to know something else?
What?
Who was another person in those 135 students who hadn't yet paid their fees?
Who?
Rathor's own daughter.
I think the school is as culpable in this mess, and I mean, it should be pointed out because unlike a single person, the school is an institution whose very fiduciary responsibility is to protect the pupils it has, the students it has, the children that they have said we will raise on behalf of the parents. And
Yeah.
for them to do something like this is a lack of
It's
balls.
heartbreaking.
Lack
I
of balls.
agree.
Sisters, Principal Sebastian just doesn't have balls.
I agree. One of Ruchika's classmates and students at Sacred Heart, Gitanjali Gayatri, came forward to say, quote, "We had heard that she was going abroad and we thought she had gone abroad after the incident. That's all we knew," end quote. This incident changed Ruchika, and understandably so. She knew she was suspended because she was assaulted by a man with power. She knew she was suspended because that man's daughter was her classmate. An already introverted Ruchika slowly grew quieter, hardly ever leaving her room and rarely ever seeming happy. But the family did still have hope. R.R. Singh had recommended an FIR, charge sheet, and departmental action against Rathore. These recommendations were then submitted to Home Minister Sampath Singh, who took the report and did nothing with it. He was supposed to submit the report to the Chief Minister of Haryana, Om Prakash Chautala of the Indian National Lokdal. But even if Om Prakash Chautala did receive the report, Rathore knew he'd be safe. After all, Rathore had always enjoyed strong support and protection from the leader. But things were about to go from bad to worse. Shortly after, another one of Rathore's political buddies, MLA Jagjit Singh Tikka, organized a large group of men to gather outside Ruchika's house to march there, create commotion, and to harass and embarrass the family. Eventually, the Chautala government was replaced by that of Hukum Singh, also from the Janata Dal, and he had standing instructions to make sure nothing and nobody touched Rathore. He needed to be protected. And then it seemed like the Girhotra family would never be supported by the government of the state they called home. After Hukum Singh, Chautala came to power again, and then the state went into president's rule. Despite that, Ruchika refused to take back her complaint. Her father refused to buckle to the pressure of goons like Rathore. But Rathore didn't stop trying. He placed policemen in plain clothes outside her residence to follow her and harass her every time she left her home. They would catcall her, pass lewd sexual comments, and never leave her alone. Believe it or not, 14-year-old Aradhana, who was the only witness to the assault, soon began getting abusive phone calls and threatening messages, which did not stop until the day she got married and left for Australia with her husband, decades after the day her best friend was assaulted. All of this is already enough to push any 14-year-old over the edge. I don't know, do you remember being 14 at all?
Yeah.
They're crappy years, right?
They were crappy years and you're a kid. Like, dude,
Yeah.
you can't deal with things like getting bad grades on an exam. You
Precisely.
think your world is crumbling around you when that happens. And this is a girl whose mother is no more.
Yeah.
She's trying to,
Start afresh.
And you are, of course, assaulted to start off with. But I think at that age, being removed from your school and your only support circle, which is your friends, it is debilitating.
I'm sure.
And to then see people protesting and
passing lewd comments at 14, like that's the point I was trying to make. Like, absolutely anything is capable of pushing like a 14-year-old over the edge. And bad grades, a breakup, like whatever. But this is too much for even an adult to handle.
Yeah.
This is just getting out of hand.
This is just like mental torture.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying that because torture is strong, but this is literally torture. Mental torture.
Absolutely. Sadly, even everything I've told you up until now was just the beginning. Ruchika's father, who had been an honest and hard-working employee with a spotless record working for the Haryana State Agricultural Board as the chief engineer, was suddenly notified that more than 20 police complaints had been registered against him, some for defamation, some for theft, and some for murder. Within weeks of the assault, he was demoted to the rank of superintending engineer, then suspended from his job, and then forced into premature retirement. Random cops would show up, sometimes to Aradhana's house and sometimes to Ruchika's house, with orders for a raid. They would walk into the house, ransack the place on false grounds like corruption, and then just leave. This happened over and over again. Eventually, 5 cases of theft and murder were even filed against Ruchika's 10-year-old brother Ashu by Ambala's superintending police, KP Singh.
if you are to be evil, just kill them,
Yeah.
and that's but this is such a different level of torture.
I agree.
Murder allegations against a 10-year-old. Who is that Amarjeet guy, the youngest? Like, what are they
Yeah.
doing? What kind of a man
And
is this?
I don't think they're thinking through, how this looks to the outside world. This is purely a scare tactic. It doesn't matter how absurd any of this sounds. It's just meant to scare and intimidate and push
But
them into a
how,
hole.
like, is what it looks like to the outside world even on Rathor's mind? Because this man,
It doesn't seem
because
like
the
it.
outside world is in his control, right? The chief minister
Yeah,
is now
yeah.
a buddy, and
Yeah. This Ambala superintendent of police, KP Singh, who filed this complaint against Ruchika's younger brother Ashu, later gave a statement claiming he knew Rathore was innocent. KP Singh was later promoted to the rank of Inspector General of Police and placed at the Chandigarh head office. The 14-year-old Aradhana too had 10 civil cases filed against her by Rathore, and even the journalist who reported on the case weren't spared.
Aishwarya, we've had to deal with one legal thing in our lives,
Yeah.
and that was so harrowing.
So harrowing.
10 civil suits against a 14-year-old. Like, how ridiculous.
A murder charge against a 10-year-old. I'm sorry.
How does
Like-
I know the police is corrupt here, obviously, but then I hope we have systems in place to not even allow such cases from being baselessly filed, because it then just cripples your life. You're stuck in this legal malady of always attending to one lawsuit after
And
another.
I honestly don't even know what he wants. Like, does he want them to leave the state? Does he want them
Yeah.
to leave the country? Clearly, those calls didn't stop for Aradhana even until she left for Australia. So he wants them to leave the country, like move to a different continent. What exactly is the motive here? They are clearly quiet. Does he want them to retract the complaint? Is that the only thing? Like,
Is it an ego thing?
it sounds like it, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
it's so overboard for what's happening. Rathore filed 2 complaints against each of the journalists who took an active role in bringing the story and Ruchika's fight to the forefront. Each case asking for a compensation of 1 crore rupees each. Ruchika's father got the family a lawyer named Pankaj Bharadwaj. They needed every bit of backing they could. Rathore didn't even spare him, slapping him with 2 court cases too, one for defamation and one for compensation. None of these court cases, like I said, were meant to go anywhere. Rathore knew it. Their point wasn't to put these people behind bars or get their money. The point was only and only harassment. He wanted to push the family over the edge, making them take back their complaint, leave town forever, and never speak of the incident again, or financially drain them till they had nothing left. But again, Ruchika and her father refused. After all, if they did bow down to pressure here, where was the end? That would essentially be a message to the world that men like Rathore can literally do anything. Assault you, rape you, harass you, but sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. All of this was happening while Rathore was actually promoted by the Om Prakash Chautala government, while Rathore's own daughter, Ruchika's classmate, and Rathore's son went on to graduate school and get degrees in law, eventually practicing with the Haryana High Court and working with Cox and Kings in Mumbai. Rathore's wife Abha was a lawyer too, and she stood by her husband from day one, defending him legally and socially. This one stings. I expect women, especially the mother of a girl the same age as Ruchika, to stand against crap like this, even if it comes from her husband. But if this case shows you anything, it's that the world is far from ideal. Remember all of those parents who had come out in support a day after the assault? The ones who had gathered and they talked about how they won't sit quietly? Yeah, they all retreated to the confines of their homes, never speaking of this matter again. Nobody visited the Girhotra house, nobody talked to them, nobody invited them anywhere. It was not worth it. Justice was too inconvenient to fight for. By 1991, the Rathore favouring state governments had ensured he would live scot-free. On the 28th of May 1991, the charge sheet filed against Rathore in the initial aftermath of the report by R.R. Singh was cleared forever. There now stood no case against Rathore, with 20 cases against Ruchika's father, 5 cases against her 10-year-old brother, 10 against her best friend, 2 cases against her lawyer, and 2 cases against the journalist who brought her story to light. It was now 1992. It had been 2 full years of constant harassment, social ostracization, and the complete and colossal failure of every single mechanism that exists for the protection of the people in this country. The only thing that had happened in all of 1992 was that now 12-year-old Ashu was the center of the vicious attacks.
When does it stop?
That's what I'm saying. Like, what's the aim?
Like, it's not like there is a court case against Rathore by the family that is... It just seems like their lawyer is right now working to rid themselves of the lawsuit filed on them instead of initiating a lawsuit against Rathore.
Yeah.
So what do you want? Like, they're not doing anything for you.
What do you want is the central question here. Like, what could have made this stop?
And
there is no answer.
Nothing justifies the harassment that he has subjected the family to, but something can explain it, I would like to see what you're getting out of it. What are you getting out of this? Like, is it sadistic pleasure that you're...
I wish I knew. This is the central question. On April 6, new complaints were lodged against Ashu for allegedly stealing a car while all of the previous harassment continued just as it was. And now it was 1993. The family's efforts had gone nowhere. Their complaints were unheard. Ruchika's father didn't have a job. Ruchika was out of school, never having graduated. Her life as a budding sportswoman who dreamed of making her country proud was shattered. And that very country failed her. Everyone she loved was left traumatized and emotionally scarred, all because she said she didn't wish to be touched by a 50-year-old man with a wife and a daughter without her consent. All because she said she deserved some form of justice for having her autonomy violated. And then, in September of 1993, a series of events began that suddenly made the idea of death sound not so horrible to Ruchika. Ashu was now 13. On the 23rd of September, he left his house to go to the nearby market to buy some things. Little did he know he was being followed by senior crime investigation agency officers dressed in plain clothes. A car full of these officers stopped right next to Ashu, picked him up, put him in the car and drove him in their jeep to the CIA staff office in Mansa Devi. It was there that Ashu's torture began at the hands of Sub-Inspector Prem Dutt and Assistant Sub-Inspectors Jain and Aryaan. Inside the CIA office, the officers tied his hands behind his back with a rope and tied weights to his feet. Then they made him bend down and stay in that position for hours on end. Eventually, Rathore came to the office and further tortured Ashu. They made him lie down on the floor, took a heavy wooden roller and rolled it on his legs and thighs, with 4 constables standing on the edges of the roller, putting their entire body weight on it. After hours of physically torturing him and verbally abusing him and making fun of him, they put him in the back of their jeep again and drove him back home. Inside the house, they called Ruchika outside to the living room while they made her watch as they beat up her baby brother in front of her eyes. As they beat Ashu up, they kept threatening Ruchika, telling her to withdraw her complaint. If she didn't, they said, she and her father would be beaten up and humiliated the same way. But they didn't even stop at that. They then handcuffed Ashu, took him out of the house and paraded him around like that in public for the world to see as they continued to ridicule him and laugh at him. Ashu was hurt, humiliated and scarred for life. He was just a kid. And then again on November 11th, 1993, Ashu was picked up and tortured. The last time they had let him go the same day. This time, they didn't. They illegally held him inside the CIA office where they refused to give him water and food for days at a stretch and kept beating him. They berated him and told him to convince his sister to take back the complaint. They also made him sign blank papers, which the police then used to show that Ashu had confessed to stealing 11 cars. He would not be released until after his sister's suicide.
We've covered many cases on Desi crime and, we tend to be impervious a little bit because we see so much crime, and this is one of those cases that brings me to tears every time.
It really
I hear
jolts it out of you.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's because I love India so much. Like, I really love our nation.
Same.
I really love our country.
Yeah.
And to see this is a failure of the state and of us as a people at so many levels.
Yeah.
The fact that taxpayer money is going into this, the fact that people are, you know, you can say that Rathore is one evil man, but this trickles down into all those CIA officers who were voluntarily and willingly, under no duress, committing these acts.
Yeah.
This trickles down to Principal Sebastian, who voluntarily, without guilt or without action against him in the future, expelled a student, which is such a sacred bond a principal shares with the students.
Yeah.
And to then see such a radical failure of our state, of our country, it's so sad. It's so sad. It's so numbing almost.
I agree, and I couldn't have said it better. Like, complete agreement from me. In fact, these cops went so far that when they caught some random car thieves from Bihar, they named Ashu as an accomplice to crimes of these middle-aged men this boy had never probably heard of. This time, they refused to let Ashu go. It had been a month. It was now December 11 and Ashu was still being tortured every day inside the CIA office. Finally, it was now December 28th. Life as Ruchika knew it was ruined. It was too late. Too much had happened. It had been 3 years since the assault, but the torture just wouldn't stop. She could see what her family was going through and she had had enough. It's so sad to think that a part of her probably blamed herself for all of this.
She entirely blamed herself. 100%. The kid was at this point completely fooled into blaming herself.
Yeah. And because of all of that blame, she did it. She picked up the bottle of insecticide kept in her house in the early morning hours of December 28th, drank it and killed herself. If you're thinking this would have ended the harassment, you couldn't be more wrong though. The evening of Ruchika's death, Rathore threw a party at his residence, the same residence where the assault had begun. A week after her death, any investigations and cases against Rathore were closed. But couldn't there be a very, very strong case against Rathore for abetment of suicide? There could be, yes. All of this is the definition of abetment of suicide. But what if those in power suddenly become hell-bent on showing that this wasn't a suicide at all, and instead it was an accidental overdose? To prove that, they firstly refused to let Ruchika's father take her body. The official autopsy and viscera by the hospital had clearly ruled the death a suicide by ingesting insecticide, which meant that the police now had to create its own autopsy report. A fake autopsy report. Rathore also told Ruchika's father that he'd only let Ashu go if he signed blank sheets of paper and would kill Ashu if he didn't. Ruchika's father did sign the papers. It was all over now anyway. He had one child left and he needed to make sure he was safe. Rathore then went on to use those signed blank sheets to prove that Ruchika's father accepted the new fake autopsy report the police was about to create. In this new report, they concocted a story. Ruchika was a young girl suffering debilitating body image issues, and so she tried consuming some over-the-counter local drug to reduce her weight. On the morning of December 28th, she consumed too many of those pills and died of an overdose.
Aishwarya, firstly, this isn't abetment to suicide. This is murder.
I agree.
And secondly, fuck you. Fuck you, Rathore, because it's just so like I want to peel my skin off, infuriating. This is just, it's sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
I've read this case so many times, researched it for so long. It's just every single time it makes my blood boil. There is literally nothing else I have to say
it's so scary, because if this was anybody, say this was a very powerful politician, which is also, a very politician or a celebrity, at least they don't have direct control over the agents of justice, which is the police.
Yeah.
But this man is the police, and this man is the top-ranking police.
Yep.
So the one arbitrator of effecting justice, right, of the investigating.
Yeah.
They're non-functional. They are of no use in this
There's
case.
a huge conflict of interest like that, yes. And clearly, the other bodies that were meant to take on the role of then arbitrating this, I really hope
this case served as a reminder to have these safeguards in place so that now this can't happen. So that now when we are covering this case, we are not subject to a murder lawsuit. And I assure you, I didn't steal anything, any car from Bihar.
Yeah, we're saying this like retroactively.
Retroactively, yeah. But man, come on.
Yeah. I don't even know how many weight loss pills one has to consume to overdose. If there are actually weight loss pills that can possibly lead to an overdose somehow. That sounds absurd on so many levels.
Meth is the only weight loss pill that can do.
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't think she was consuming
I don't think she was consuming meth. Rathore, I think you were.
But Rathore and his team got something very important. Someone very close to Ruchika to confirm this story and sign an affidavit. Ruchika's mother. That's right, Rathore and his posse of corrupt officials brought Ruchika's dead mother back to life to sign this fake affidavit. Eventually, it was obviously revealed that the signature was not of Ruchika's dead mother, but of her nanny from when she was younger, who they tried to pass off as her mother. They finally released Ashu after not only Ruchika killed herself, but also after her last rites and cremation was over. Ashu was brought back to his house unconscious. He had been stripped naked and beaten up by drunk cops the night before. He couldn't walk for weeks after that. He had come out of the CIA building to realize his sister was no more and his life would never be the same again. Just weeks after Ruchika's death, Rathore was promoted again by Haryana's then Chief Minister Bhajan Lal of the Haryana Janhit Congress. Ruchika's father and brother had had enough now. This fight was for justice for Ruchika, but Ruchika was gone and now they wanted to leave too. They left Chandigarh when, even after Ruchika's death, the torment didn't seem to stop. The Girhotra bungalow, the bungalow where Ruchika grew up and was raised in Sector 6 Panchkula, was forcibly sold to a lawyer working for Rathore. Ruchika's father had managed to get a bank job as a manager by 1992, but after she killed herself, he was suspended from his job as a bank manager on charges of alleged corruption. They moved to the outskirts of Simla, where Ruchika's father took up earth filling as a job, which is basically moving soil, Aryaan, from an unsuitable location to a more suitable one.
So he got into being a manual laborer.
Yeah.
From a bungalow in Chandigarh.
And the bank job he loved. And it's not even about like the job or the respect for the job or any of that.
No.
It's what this man wanted to do his entire life. It's the job he had voluntarily picked for himself. It's the fact that he was forced out of his work, of his life's effort.
After his daughter is dead, and again, I'm just going to sound like, I'm complaining. I am just...
I know. We just sound whiny with this episode. But you know who stayed back in Chandigarh and continued to fight for Ruchika? Aradhana and her parents. Remember that first report drafted by R.R. Singh, the one that said an FIR should be filed against Rathore and that he was guilty? Aradhana's father went on a hunt for that report after the Girhotras left Chandigarh. And finally, he found it in 1997. By November of that year, he took that report and moved the case against Rathore to the Haryana High Court. And then finally, in a break to the case in 1998, the Haryana High Court ordered the CBI to conduct an inquiry.
Thank the Lord.
God. While this was happening in 1999, Om Prakash Chautala of the Indian National Lokdal, now Chief Minister for the 5th time, again promoted Rathore, making him the police chief of the state. The same state government even recommended his name for the President's Police Medal for Distinguished Service in November 1999. But by this time, the fact that he was involved in this case was well known across the country, which is when Shanta Kumar, who was then Vice President of the BJP in 2000, wrote a letter to Om Prakash Chautala urging him to take strict action against Rathore in the case. And you know what Chautala did? He went running and crying to then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee about it. Now, the CBI investigation was well underway. The High Court had ordered the investigation to be wrapped up in 6 months, but the CBI took more than a year. Then finally, on the 16th of November 2000, 7 years after Ruchika's death, the CBI filed a charge sheet against Rathore, where he wasn't accused of abetment to suicide, but only of violating Section 354, which is molestation. But despite the charge sheet under the Chautala government, Rathod continued to be the police chief of the state. Aradhana's father fought to have abetment to suicide be included in the list of offences Rathod was being accused of. And in a move nobody saw coming, Special CBI Judge Jagdev Singh Dhanjal demanded that the offence be added. You know what happened to that judge? He was forced into premature retirement 2 years later, in the middle of the ongoing case.
I fucking hate this.
But even this CBI investigation and court case was a colossal mess and a huge injustice. If you think the CBI was going to come in and suddenly fix everything for Ruchika's family, you're so wrong. They were going to ruin the family's one and possibly last shot at justice. One of the justices on the CBI court case refused to let Rathod be accused of abetment to suicide. This justice was a neighbor of the Girhotras and involved in a property dispute with them. This was a conflict of interest of the highest magnitude. This justice was also a close relative of the secretary of the Haryana Lawn Tennis Association, of which Rathod was the founding member. This justice is now the president of the Haryana State Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission. What is even crazier is that after filing the charge sheet in 2000, the CBI took 7 years to just record evidence from 16 witnesses. Compare that to the Defense Counsel, which took 9 months to complete the examination of 13 out of those 16. And Rathod wasn't going to give up just yet. He began to use his influence to shift and alter the way the CBI was conducting the investigation. He began regularly visiting the office of the CBI Joint Director at the time, even bribing him with money to help build his new Gurgaon house. When his influence didn't get him what he wanted, he began to delay the trial, filing applications to transfer the case to different jurisdictions. Ruchika's is one of the rare few cases in Indian history which was heard in 3 different jurisdictions: Haryana, Punjab and Chandigarh, apart from being heard in the Supreme Court and High Court as well. And the CBI just let him get away with these applications in shifting jurisdictions. He also began to come up with absurd technical demands, like wanting the trial to be videographed. And then, in the court during trial, Rathod claimed that all of these delays, all of which he caused, meant that he should get a shorter sentence. And then finally, on the 21st of December, both sides closed their arguments and the case finally had a verdict. Rathod was sentenced to 6 months in prison with a 1,000 rupee fine. That's less, right? By the standard of everything that's happened in this case, 6 months is nothing. If you agree with me on that, I'm sure you would also agree that 10 minutes in jail is less. Because 10 minutes is how long Rathod actually spent in jail. 10 minutes in, he was granted bail for 10,000 rupees. The most severe consequence that Rathod faced for his crimes was that his presidential medal was taken back by a committee and that he was stabbed outside the court by a man from Varanasi. We began this case with some suspense. Was this a suicide or a murder? I leave this question open to you now. The autopsy's result was decisive. It was a suicide. She killed herself. But from where I'm standing, she was dragged to death by absolutely everyone around her. From where I'm standing, this is the most blatant case of murder we've ever covered. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.